Before we do continue though, let's just commit all our changes. Go to Team Explorer, go to Changes, type in a build. This is our initial build, call it initial build, and do a commit all. Now you'll notice I've been committing everything to master. Eventually we'll start pulling that into individual branches, but just for this initial build while we get the core system working, we'll keep to master. So that's done. Let's sync that up, and once that's all pushed up, we're ready to go ahead and start on the next lesson. Okay, so in the last video we created our base data model. So we've got our data model and data properties, our schema and our schema property. Then we had created two view models which are going to query a database and bring in all this data together to create one unified model. Eventually we'll expose that via a web API, but before we do all that, what I usually like to do is go ahead and test to make sure the models are behaving in the way I want them to. So to do that, we'll create a new test. Go into our Core Data Web API test project that should have been created when we created the web API, because we ticked the option to create a test project, and we're going to take this default unit test class that is created for us, and we'll just rename it and we'll call it model tests. Okay, the first thing we want to do is create our first tests, and generally we name our tests quite verbosely to explain what it is we're doing, so that when these tests get run in an automated pipeline, if any of them fail, we get a good idea of what it is that's actually failed. So what we're going to say here is we're going to say can get view model from schema and data. So what we want to do is we're going to have to add some references. So we want to reference our core model, our data models and our view models. So we need to do everything. And the first thing we'll do is we shall create a new schema. So schema, schema, and then let's just resolve that. So we're going to set the name, so we're going to put some example values in here. So what we're going to do is imagine we're creating a schema to hold customer information. So we'll have the name as customer, and then we'll have a list of properties. And we'll just have one property for now. We shall store a new schema property, give it an ID of 1 and a name of customer. So display text will be, actually this needs to be customer name, so rather than customer we'll say customer name without space, and finally the data type will be string. So again, let's just resolve that by using systems.collections.generic, and that will create our schema. Next we will create our data model. So this will be the data that will reference the schema, and it's going to have a list of data properties. We'll have a single data property. So the schema property ID is the ID of the schema property that we're referencing. And the value will be company name. Okay, and then finally what we want to do is we're going to create a model view that needs to combine these all together. Now we're going to be writing a LINQ query, so in order for it to be able to do that we need to add an extra using statement, and we need to add system.LINQ. So now we will say model view whoops. Again, we just need to resolve that reference. Equals new model view. And then we're going to set the view.modelView properties to be equal to, and this is where we write our script. So from m in model.dataProperties, we're going to join s in schema properties on m.schema property ID equals s.id. So that is doing a query that is linking these two lists together on the schema property ID. So obviously in schema property it's just ID, but in data property we reference it via schema property ID. And then we're going to select need to get rid of that. Select a new model view property, and then we'll fill out all the information from the relevant underlying class. The data type will be the data type, the name will be the name, the value value, and finally we'll just turn that into a list, and that will fill it out. So this is setting it up, and we've defined a new schema, which is our template, defining a new data model, putting some data in it, creating a model view that's going to combine the two together. So I've got an error there, we don't say equals, we actually say, when we're writing LINQ statements, we actually say equals. And then what we can do now is actually go ahead and test things. So the first thing we'll test is, do we have one property? So view.modelViewProperties.count should be equal to 1. And then finally we're going to confirm that the value of that property is what we're expecting. So view first or default, we're going to do a query and the value of that should be complete coda. Okay, so if we build our project now and then run the test, now we can have a click run all up here. You might have the test explorer window. If you don't, go to the test menu, say run and all tests, and that will launch the test explorer window for you. Okay, so we've got an error. Let's go and have a look at what the error is. And it tells us down here, expected 0, actual 1. So the count, and this is wrong, and that's because our LINQ statement, we're trying to link schema property ID on schema.id, and it's not the schema.id, it's the it shouldn't be the schema ID because that's the underlying schema itself, but it wants to be is on S because it's what we're querying, so s.id. Let's rerun those tests with that small change, and now all the tests pass. So what we'd normally do obviously is we'd maybe add more schema properties and more data properties and increase the count. But the point is we can see that the way we've got our data model set up at the moment, it achieves what we're trying to achieve. So we can go ahead now and start implementing the actual data persistence layer, confident that at least our models are behaving as they should.